Guy visits Granny first time in a year and sees Skyscraper instead of her house. Clyde was insulted when his grandmother offered to leave him her house if he stayed with her and helped with repairs. He and his parents didn't talk to her for a year, and when Clyde finally traveled to visit Granny on her birthday, her home was gone. "Okay, let's get this over with," Chris said as he parked in front of his mother's house. The property was severely neglected, and he didn't like spending time there. Chris's wife, Mandy, and his son, Clyde, leaped from the car and hurried to the front porch. Although the family lived in a different city, they were embarrassed by the dilapidated house and didn't want to risk anyone recognizing them. "Hello, my dears." Chris's mom, Sharon, opened the door. She spread her arms to embrace her family, but they rushed past her to get inside. "You need to get a handyman to fix your house, Mom," Chris said. "I was hoping you and Clyde might help me out with a few repairs while you're here," Sharon replied. "Repairs are expensive, and my pension only stretches so far. We've barely arrived, and already you're nagging." Chris shook his head. "We drove for hours to visit you for your birthday, not to work on your house." Sharon's face crumpled. Chris thought she might be about to cry, so he herded everyone into the dining room. "Let's get this party started," Chris said. The family sat down together and enjoyed a meal. Sharon mentioned several small things that needed fixing around the house while they ate, but Chris changed the topic every time. The longer he spent at his mother's house, the more he remembered why he only visited annually. When everyone finished eating, Chris saw an opportunity to escape. He volunteered himself and his wife to do the dishes. Mom smiled at him, and Chris hoped doing this one chore might be enough to prevent Mom from complaining for the remainder of their visit. "Clyde, dear, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Clyde had daydreamed about his latest video game throughout the meal, but he turned when Granny spoke. "You'll be applying for college in the next few years. Why don't you apply to colleges here in Dallas? You can stay with me for free, and all I ask is that you help out with some repairs." Granny smiled at him. "You're my only grandchild, and I'll gladly leave my home to you if you help me take care of it. Are you mad?" Clyde stared at his grandmother in horror. "Why would I want to stay in this dump? I'm going to be a doctor. Why on earth would I need your ruined old house?" I suppose you don't." Granny lowered her head. "To be honest, all I really wanted was to spend more time with you before I leave this world." Chris appeared at the door to the dining room to find out why Clyde was shouting. He was livid when he heard about Granny Sharon's offer and Clyde's response. "How dare you try to foist your neglected house onto Clyde?" Chris shouted. "That's your grandson, not some free laborer for you to take advantage of." Granny Sharon burst into tears, but Chris just shook his head. He threw down the dishcloth he draped over his shoulder and gestured to Clyde. "Get your things, son," Chris said. "We're leaving." Clyde hurried to the front door. He paused to take in the peeling paint, creaking floorboards, and warped ceiling boards in Granny's house. He couldn't imagine why she'd think he wanted to inherit this dump. Chris and his little family didn't speak to Granny Sharon for a year. When the time drew nearer for them to visit her on her birthday, Chris couldn't bear to go. "It's time you took a drive on the open road," Chris told Clyde. "You've been driving a while now, and it will be a good experience to drive to Granny on your own." Clyde was so excited at the opportunity to drive so far by himself that he didn't think twice. He left on Granny's birthday before dawn and had an uneventful trip until he reached Dallas. Your choice was motivated only by greed. You'll find what you deserve at the following coordinates. Clyde parked on the roadside and double-checked the map on his phone. He'd been a passenger on this trip so often that he hadn't checked the route beforehand. Clyde had assumed he'd find Granny's house easily. Clyde frowned at the map. He'd been correct. This was the right address. He looked out his window again and frowned because a gleaming skyscraper stood in the lot where Granny's house was supposed to be. Fear bloomed in Clyde's chest. What could have happened to Granny? His only clue was the building, so he hopped out and went inside. There was a concierge seated behind a spotless brushed steel desk. "Excuse me," Clyde asked. "I'm looking for the old lady who used to live here, Mrs. Bauer. I'm her grandson. Do you know what happened to her?" "Of course, sir. Follow me." The concierge stepped out from his desk and led Clyde to the elevator. "You want the penthouse suite. I'll inform Mrs. Bauer that you're on your way up." Clyde was so confused that he wondered if he was dreaming. He rode the elevator up to the penthouse and was astonished to see Granny Sharon waiting for him there. "Clyde, it's so good to see you again." Granny rushed up and hugged him. "I was beginning to think you all had written me off." Clyde gaped at the modern fixtures and elegant decor in the penthouse. "Why are you living here, Granny?" "Oh, the developers were after my house for a long time. I didn't want to sell, but after your visit last year, they made me a wonderful offer. Instead of buying me out, they gave me the penthouse suite to live in." Granny hobbled toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I agreed because of the view. Now I get to watch the sun coming up over the city every morning." Clyde couldn't believe how much his granny's life had changed. When he returned home, his parents couldn't believe it either. "This is a great opportunity for you, Clyde," Chris said. "Next year, you must go to college in Dallas and stay with your grandmother. Take good care of her, and she'll surely leave you that penthouse in her will."